So it's time to review the BX100 from.
So it's time to review the
So let's take a look at Crucial's new entry-level SSD, and that is the BX100. Welcome back to Tech Yes, this is Brian coming back to you guys today with the BX100 review. This is the 500GB model, and the great thing about this review is today is I've got the previous generation MX100 to directly compare it to. And there's also some other things that I will be able to tell you about today, and that is how the MX100 has held up after 6 months of usage, as I have been using it as my main drive. And honestly, the results are pretty good for both these drives. But anyway, let's take a look at the BX100 and what it features. Then we'll look at the benchmarks, and then we'll get on to a conclusion. So the BX100 is essentially an even further cut down version of the MX100. And what Crucial have decided to do is cut away a few features from the MX100 that probably the home user would not find themselves benefiting from, and then also decided to cut the price down even further. So currently the 120GB model comes in at $69.99 or $70
recommended retail price. The 250GB version comes in at $106.
Also, in other parts of the world, I'll quickly show you guys some recommended retail pricing here. So this is for Australia, and this is for the UK. So what are the key differences? Let's have a look here. Basically, the BX100 has a different controller than the MX100. So Crucial have decided to go, this time around, they've decided to go with a company called Silicon Motion for the controller. As opposed to the previous generation in the MX100, they went with the Marvel controller. Now in the benchmarks, I'll show you what the key difference is, though the Silicon Motion controller, for what it's worth, is a pretty good controller. There's no denying that. Also, another key feature that they've gone away with the BX100 is hardware level encryption. So it's more of a feature for businesses and server type applications, though I don't think the home user will be at a disadvantage from losing this feature. And another final thing that they've gone away with is thermal protection as well. So if things are getting very hot where your PC is, then obviously that thermal protection can protect your SSD from overheating in a case of a serious event. So also, taking a close look at the BX100, we can see that this time around in the 500GB model at least, they've decided to go with 64GB NAND flash banks here. So this is, I think, the first time that they're implementing these banks, as opposed to the previous MX100 where they were using 16 by 16GB flash ROM banks in that drive. So that's the key thing about the BX100, so it is using larger banks. So another thing with the BX100 that I really liked was this time around they've gone with a steel backplate with the build construction. So in the MX100 they used a plastic build plate there, which kind of put the color a little bit off. And it's just these little things that when a company listens, it makes a good company a great company in my opinion. So kudos to Crucial for doing that. So with the BX100, you also get 72 terabytes total bytes written of the lifetime as well, which accounts to about 66GB per day for 3 years. So I think it's a great thing that Crucial are being transparent, and I like that companies like Crucial are publishing these numbers. However, the big question on your mind is, how does the BX100 perform, especially compared to its little brother, or its big brother in this case, the MX100? Let's find out. So anyway, let's get on to the benchmarks, and I'm sorry in advance for my microphone. It's this microphone stand's broken, so we're going to get some kind of live Tech Yes City commentary action going here for you guys. But anyway, let's get on to the benchmarks, and the first two benchmarks have decided to use ASSD and HD Tune Pro. ASSD is such a good benchmark. It's my favorite benchmark for benchmarking SSDs, as it just gives you the numbers that you really want to know. And then I decided to go with HD Tune Pro and do a transfer benchmark of a 1GB file just to find out what's going on in real time with these SSDs. So anyway, let's get on to the benchmarks here. And as you can see here, the MX100 is first up here, the 256GB version. I love this SSD. It's currently my favorite SSD out of all the SSDs out there, especially in terms of value for money. Now this SSD scored really well in the ASSD scores, and I have to make one point clear, in that this was used as the main OS drive for doing all these benchmarks as well. So if anything, it's a slight hindrance compared to the other SSDs. Also, another thing is before I run all my benchmarks, I do make sure that my computer is flatlining, as I call it, and that is that there's no hiccups that could interfere potentially with the benchmarks. So I do recommend if you guys are going to benchmark your hard drives or SSDs, you do the same. Anyway, let's look at the numbers here. Anyway, sequential reads 500 megabytes per second. That's pretty much as good as it gets on the sequential reads. Sequential writes could be a little bit better, though they're a solid 330 megabytes per second. Very good score there. The 4K read and writes, 26 megabytes per second. Great speeds on those. Almost touching 100 megabytes per second on the 4K writes. Very important. So that's a pretty important score there. It's probably my most single-handedly most important score, and the MX100 score is fantastic in this regards. Access times are really good, as well as the queue depth, scoring a highly respectable 95,662 input outputs per second there. So IOPS there are fantastic on the MX100 as well. And this whole drive came together to give it a total score of 1,046 in ASSD. So very good there. Moving on to HD Pro here, we can see that I ran 3 different tests, three different data patterns actually, just to get an idea of what's going on here. And you see here the lines are just pretty smooth all across the board. So this is again a big shout out, I guess, to the Marvel controller, because this is why people love the Marvel controller on the SSDs. It's such a good controller. This will take care of giving you a smoothest experience when it comes to the SSD performance. That being said, let's move on now to the next SSD. So moving on now to the BX100. This is a 500 gigabyte version, so if anything, it should perform slightly better than the 256 gigabyte MX100. Though let's get into the benchmark scores here. ASSD sequential reads were really good, over 500 megabytes per second, as good as it gets across that SATA 6 gigabit per second cap there. The write speeds, 423 megabytes per second. This scored quite a bit higher than the MX100 did. Though I'll talk about this a little bit later. The 4K read and writes, great speeds there on the reads. The writes were a little bit slower than the MX100, and this is one of the most crucial points, all pun intended, of a drive where you want to get a good score. Even though it did score slightly slower than the MX100, that is still a very good score for desktop usage. Don't be alarmed that it scored a little bit slower than MX100. 86 megabytes per second on those random 4K writes is still a really good score. Anyway, let's look at the queue depth here. We've got, mainly we're looking at the input outputs per second, and on the read side of things, you can see that it performed significantly lower than the MX100. So I'm curious as to why that is, but on the other side of things, it's not too much to worry, because this is more the queue depth benchmark, or the 4 to 6K 64 kilobyte threaded test is more of a server sort of benchmark there. I wouldn't be too alarmed by it. The access times, 37 nanoseconds and 38 nanoseconds. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is extremely low. That's pretty much as good as it gets in this regard. And both these scores came together to score a total of 931 in ASSD. So the MX100 did edge out the BX100 in ASSD. And so that's interesting to note. Another thing I wanted to note was the HD Tune Pro tests here. If we look across the 3 different patterns here, we can see on the right side of things here, we can see these dips, and they were consistently coming up. I did benchmark this numerous times to try and see if it was an anomaly, but it wasn't. These dips are real. So I guess I can attribute this to the difference in the controllers. The Silicon Motion controller is not as good as the Marvel controller. So that's something key to note. However, let's move on now to the final benchmark. That's the Intel. And you can see that the BX100 and the MX100 will be in a different league compared to this next SSD. So here's the Intel 335, 240 gigabyte version. So you see in ASSD, the sequential reads were really high as well, though it fell behind in the write speeds. And keep in mind, though, I have been using this drive for quite a while, as well as I have been using my MX100. So the MX100 is a very durable drive, very tough drive, but the Intel's kind of starting to show its age here a little bit, and the 4K random read and writes are still really good as well. So there's nothing to worry about. The queue depth there is not as good as the other 2 drives and the other 2 crucial drives, and the access times are a little bit slower than both the crucial drives. This came together to score a total of 696 points. Moving on to HD Tune Pro, and when we get to sort of the mixed and random data patterns here, we can see that it does have a lot of dips here. I guess this is because the drive does have a lot of information on it, though keep in mind that the MX100 does have a lot of information on it as well. So they're both running OSs on them, and they're both filled up with kind of similar data. So I'm kind of surprised to see that the Sandforce was kind of falling behind by this much in this particular benchmark. Okay, with those three benchmarks out the way, we can then look at the two drives that actually matter. So let's look at these two drives side by side. So I decided to pick out the most important part of HD Tune on both these because I believe it represents what we're looking at with these drives. We can see here that the Marvel controller is probably a better controller in general than the Silicon Motion, though it is important to know that the Silicon Motion doesn't look too bad. I could just imagine it once I started filling it up with a lot of data, it'd probably get even worse. So kudos to Marvel. I think they do make the best controllers at the moment on SSDs. What about Samsung? And that's probably a question some of you guys will ask. If Samsung want to send me over an SSD to review, then they're more than welcome. My door or my post box is open anytime, guys, so you're welcome to send me one over for review. But okay, so getting back to the benchmark scores here, we can see that the MX100 was edging out the BX100 in ASSD. And I mean, the access times were better on the BX100, and the sequential writes were slightly better. Though it did sort of fall a little bit behind in those 4K write speeds. But anyway, something to take out of this is that the BX100 is a great drive. Just the MX100 is a little bit better. So if anything, they're both fantastic drives for the money, especially for the end home user. I think what the important thing to take out of these benchmarks is that the BX100, if you put it in your home PC or you put an MX100 in your home PC, they're both going to do a great job. Though I do take preference to the MX100 just because I've used it for 6 months now. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, these scores are just impressing me a lot because I've had the chance to put data on it, give it a solid durability test, and it's still performing like a champion. The BX100, in time, I will report back on it and tell you how it performs, but it is looking great, just like the MX100 is. And if anything, I've learned over time to trust Crucial. Every product I've got from Crucial has been an absolute stellar champion. That's one thing I can take out of my experience with Crucial drives. But anyway, that being said, let's move on now to a conclusion for you guys, and we'll snap it up in black and white and make a solid recommendation for you guys. So in conclusion, I sort of found myself liking the MX100 even more than when I first reviewed it. I mean, this thing has held the test of time already, 6 months of just heavy usage, and it still performs like it did on day one. So kudos to Crucial with the MX100. I mean, I fell in love with this thing when I first got it, and I still am in love with the MX100. The BX100 still posted good numbers, but it kind of, I mean, it didn't shine as hard with the MX100. I mean, this is the 256GB version, and it was outperforming the 500GB BX100. So I was kind of left at a crossroads here and like, where do I go with this recommendation? And my recommendation is going to be pretty simple, and that is still that Crucial make fantastic drives for the money. I mean, if you're looking for an SSD or you're looking for DDR3 memory, DDR4 memory, my recommendations are still the same as they always are. You can go and buy a Crucial product and know that you're getting good value for money, even if you buy it at the recommended retail price, which is a great thing to say about Crucial. Now, clean and cut, simple answer for a recommendation. If you can't get the MX100, then get the BX100. That would be my recommendation. I do prefer the MX100 over the BX100 simply because it's using that Marvel controller. And as you saw in that HD Tune benchmark, the MX100 showed more smoother lines. I mean, our little friend here, the Intel SSD, that didn't do too well. Though, to this credit, I mean, this drive's been used a lot as well, so I will say that about this drive. But, I mean, both these drives just kick the living piss out of this thing, so it was a no comparison. So the BX100 is a great drive for the money, and I can sit here and recommend it if you can't pick up an MX100. I just think the MX100 offers that better bang for buck, even if it is a little bit more expensive. You've just got that Marvel controller there, you've got some more smoother lines on the benchmark. So in a nutshell, I think it would just be plain and simple like this. If you're a business user or you're using this in a business environment, you might want to look at the MX100 or even the newly released MX200. Though if you are looking for the cheapest SSD for your buck, then the BX100 is great for an end home user. So there's no denying that. Both drives, though, are great drives. I would have liked to have seen the MX200 come through here, even if it was only a 256 gigabyte model. That would have been pretty cool to compare the MX100 against the MX200. Though as it stands, the MX100 is still a slightly better drive than the BX100. Anyway, what do you guys think? Which one would you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Tech Yes City, where I'll be coming back to you guys with more tech reviews and news. Also, one more thing before I go is that all these drives, the MX100, the BX100, and the Intel, they all work together with one another in Windows 8.1 seamlessly, so there was no conflicts, unlike my last review where the MX100 refused to work with the Intel and vice versa in Windows 7. And also the speeds were slightly faster, I thought, in Windows 8.1. So I guess that spells that Windows 8.1 maybe is slightly better for SSDs, since the OS natively supports SSDs. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review, and I am out of here. Peace out for now. Bye.